Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelizer, Catalina Rojas, and Roshan Paul here for the next episode, Season 9, Episode 10 of the Social Change Career Podcast. We're delighted to have Roshan Paul as Director of Leadership Practice at IREX, and we'll talk about what in the world does IREX mean. Roshan has had a very high impact career, working both at Ashoka, doing his he's originally from India, doing his undergraduate in the US, Harvard Kennedy School. He co-founded the Amani Institute, which is a wonderful organization that's been around, I think, for 15 years. I'm losing track of time, but he'll correct me.
12, yeah.
12 years. That helps accelerate the skills and careers of social impact professionals and innovators from around the world. So if you're looking for upskilling opportunities, check out the Amani Institute. He took some time off between stepping down from his formal co-CEO role at Amani to travel the world. So if you follow him on Instagram, you might see it, but it's called Organized Nomad. And this episode is sponsored by the Rotary Peace Fellowship. We'll put the link in there, but it's one of the world's coolest fellowships for innovators who are connected to peace and the SDG Sustainable Development Goals. And they offer 8 different programs. 6 are programs to do a master's degree fully funded at one of their partner institutions, and 2 are professional certificate programs. Applications will open in February, but it's a great thing. And then also, if you're looking for interesting community, check out the PCDN Career Campus. Catalina and I are in Medellin, Colombia, and Roshan, are you in Washington or Virginia or Maryland? In Washington,
D.C., right downtown.
So as we normally do this will be live streamed, and please feel free as you're watching to let us know what part of the world you're watching from. And if you have any questions, but it'd be great if people would start putting in the chat where you're watching from. And then after about 10 minutes, we'll bring in some of the questions from the audience. And then also in about 2 weeks, this will be converted to an episode of the Social Change Career Podcast. There's about 100 episodes with amazing, brilliant people from all over the world. So please check it out on our website or any podcasting platform. And we always appreciate if people give comments or reviews. So thank you so much, Roshan, and I'll turn it over to Catalina.
Hi, Roshan. And full disclosure, we have met a long time ago, and it's been such a privilege to witness your career in your leadership. And Craig speaks very fast, and I don't, because English is not my first language. So I'm going to slow it down, because you founded the Amani Institute, and we really truly recommend everyone who was rethinking about how to grow professionally as a social entrepreneur, but from a perspective of the global South. I've always had so much respect for that project, and seeing you step out from that to work in you're going to tell us a little bit more about IREX. It's incredible, and also kind of weird, what I called my being for 20 years in the US to going back to Colombia. I classify that as weird, but also from being your own boss to going back to serving in a big bureaucracy, I also called weird. But I was told to ask you the first question, which I think is a valid one, Roshan. If you go back and reflect in your career from your college days to right now, what is your why? Or what have been, if it's not only why, multiple whys, what's that thing that presses you to wake up and what you want to do in this world?
Great, thank you, Kata. And firstly, thanks to both of you, Craig and Catalina, for having me on this program. Craig, in particular, we've been connected for a long time and played such a pivotal role in the early years and the early days of Amani Institute and getting started. So I'll always be grateful for that. And of course, no conversation with Craig is complete without also acknowledging that it's thanks to Craig that I met my wife as well. So for all of you listening, Craig is obviously a master matchmaker as well as a master networker. But getting to your question, Kata, I would say that my why has always been around helping people to achieve their potential. I think that that's what what gives us the most satisfaction and fulfillment as people. And, everything that I've done in the first decade of my career supporting social entrepreneurs that were Ashoka Fellows to grow and scale their organizations and their teams, to then starting and running Amani Institute, which was all about helping people move into more meaningful and impactful careers, to what I'm doing now as the Director of Leadership Practice at IREX, which is also about developing the next generation of leaders around the world. So it's all connected for me into this idea of helping people to achieve a potential and an impact that's greater than what they may have initially believed.
And we forgot to say, this is in Roshan's bio, he's also the co-author of a book that came out last year, The New Rules of Work. Kata was giving, yes. And so it's a wonderful text. We'll put the link in here for anyone either exploring how to connect your career to social impact or advising others. And so Roshan, one of the things, so many people, I'm sure, come to you and come to us and say, like, I want to do something in the world that advances some kind of impact. How do you suggest people try to find the right niche or path for their skills and experiences without kind of taking a vow of poverty or without spending so much time? Like, how do people begin to orientate? What does it mean to advance a career of impact?
Yeah, I think there's, in the book that you referenced, Craig, it's called The New Reason to Work. What we understand that this is kind of, for many people, it's their first and most pressing question. And we break that up in two ways. First is to understand the landscape of opportunities in social impact, which most people, I would say, are not aware is probably greater than at any other point in history. And so we walk through the landscape of career options and how it evolved from, I would say, the start of philanthropy, as an organized endeavor in the 19th century, and all the way to modern trends around private sector roles and social impact and social businesses and so on. And it's just, a really large set of opportunities that I think most people are not aware of. So we try to map that out. And then secondly, we say, we have a list of questions. So 6 questions to help you decide from this large set of opportunities, because we also know that, like, as choice increases, paralysis, the paradox of choice, right? So the more choices you have, the harder it is to make one. We also ask people a set of 6 questions to help them to decide at this particular stage in their life and in their career, which type of organization is best for them. So those questions are around, what type of cause or geography that, do you most want to work in? What kinds of skills and, what kinds of roles do your past education and skills set you up for? How important is salary and benefits to you at this stage in your career? Are you someone who's more interested in working in the field directly with beneficiaries, or are you more of a system-wide kind of player? How important are things like culture, travel, autonomy, things like that to you? And so with each of these questions, we lay out the pros and cons of different types of organizations that are out there. So just to tackle head on maybe the elephant in the room for most people is, let's look at the money question, right? How important is salary for you? And I think it's undeniable that in certain parts of the nonprofit world, particularly smaller organizations or startups, you don't pay very much. You can't make a lot of money. And for many people, either at the early stage of their career or the late stage of their career, money may not be that important, and so they can afford to take those chances or work with those organizations. But there's also a set of organizations, the United Nations, the World Bank, to large consulting firms, to corporate social impact roles, where you can actually make quite a bit of money working in social impact. Certainly, if not the same amounts of money as, hedge fund, investors or corporate lawyers, you can certainly make money that's on par with high profile other roles in the private sector, and most people don't seem to know that as well. And so again, it really depends on where you are in your career, what's important to you, and and different types of organizations offer different opportunities in this regard. So that's just one of those 6 questions, and so we list out the pros and cons of all of those that hopefully help people to make those decisions.
Sounds like a book that it could benefit greatly the PCDN community. And I want to focus on one of the questions that you briefly mentioned, because it's just too much and will take us longer than you want to stay here with us. But it's the question on skills. And the same way that we talk, and I appreciate you for raising the issue of money, or as I call the M word. Skills is also one of the things that we discuss a lot here in the community at PCDN. So again, looking back at your career, top 3 skills that have carried you throughout, and where actually did you acquire, or where do you think are the right places where people need to look for skills? And obviously this question is, what are the skills that are that you consider are in demand or are needed in order to be employable these days?
So I think the question of skills is an interesting one, because oftentimes when we think of skills, we tend to think of what might be sometimes called hard skills, right? So that you need to, be a whiz at Excel, let's say, or at coding, or making video, and so on. And these are important and they're good to have, certainly, but they're not as important, in my experience, as what you might call soft skills or human skills. There is this old HR proverb that says you get hired for hard skills and fired for soft skills. And particularly as you get older and like more senior in your career, it's your soft skills that end up making a bigger impact and bigger difference to your career success than I would say your hard skills do. So as we think about skills, it's important to not just think about the types of skills you would get at a university program, but also the kinds of skills that you have to build on the job or through your personality, and or just making yourself a better person, a better human being as well, and particularly with regard to your interactions with others. So I think there's a set of soft skills around leadership, around communication skills, around networking, and then personality traits, like, are you an optimistic, problem-solving kind of person, or perhaps more like a pessimistic or problem-finding kind of person, right? Like, optimistic problem solvers do much better typically in the rising up through the ranks, because people want to work with them, as opposed to more pessimistic kinds of people. People who are good at networking, building relationships for the long term, as opposed to more transactional or what can I get from you kind of relationships, I think also do very well. And that's a set of skills, particularly that are only going to get more and more important as we spend more of our time working remotely and so on. So how do you build those kinds of interactions and connections and networks virtually, as opposed to in the physical space as we may be more used to doing? So those are a couple there that I would say are really important. Being willing to say yes when opportunities come, right? Like, for a lot of us, or a lot of people, they want to do something and they get an opportunity, but they've got other responsibilities, or they have too much. It's going to take too much time, or they have to learn something that they didn't know they have to learn. And sometimes we say no to things, and I think it's being willing to say yes and do the work to take advantage of an opportunity that comes your way is, I think, really important as well for people. So it's a mindset, like looking for opportunities and saying yes to it. So I think the mindsets are probably as important, if not more important, than the skills.
So thank you so much, Roshan. Kata, did you have a follow-up question?
Well, in the script we built together.
Go ahead, sorry. I always throw away the script.
Yeah, you always throw. No, I actually wanted to tell a little story. Yesterday we were in a Halloween party, and we were talking about our kids, and some of our friends have kids that are in college. So we naturally say, oh, how is she doing? And what is she studying? She's doing her BA, her undergrad. And it was kind of a surprise for me, but it shouldn't have been, because she said, my daughter is studying social media management. And I'm like, what is that? Really, is that a thing? So obviously it is. So I guess I wanted to tell this story to ask you, in the field of social impact, if for lack of a better term, of encompassing social change, what do you think are the areas of growth and jobs that, or job titles that, what do you think are the future of job titles in our field?
I think it's easier to talk about growth areas than job titles. Job titles, I think, there'll be new jobs. There'll also be jobs that exist today, but in new fields, I would say. So, I think some of the huge growth areas, obviously, right now are, I would say, one is around private sector involvement in social impact, and that has, I think, everything from modern day consumers and employees pushing their companies to do better, to be better corporate citizens, to larger scale issues like the diversity, equity, inclusion conversation or the climate change imperative that are forcing companies to basically be better and be focused on more things that are not just about the bottom line, or seeing that these issues actually impact the bottom line in the long term, and they need to keep an eye on them or to do better by them. And then I think in many parts of the world, we're in a time, what at IREX we call closed and closing spaces, where democracy is on the decline, it's in retreat. There's a rise of authoritarian governments around the world, and governments that are clamping down on civil society. In this time, in this era, then the private sector also becomes an important part of the impact sort of spectrum, and their role is going to be quite important. So I see that as being a growth area on the positive side because they're being pushed, and on the negative side partly because they have to, because civil society is struggling in many parts of the world. I think another big growth area obviously are the two that I've alluded to right now around climate change and diversity, equity, inclusion, which are sweeping certainly the Western world, but I think obviously all around the world as well. And these are both leading to a whole set of new jobs that maybe didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago, and that's going to continue, I think, as well. So I would say those are possibly 3 areas that I think are going to be emerging and continue to grow. So what are kind of jobs, right? So I think climate, for instance, is going to be as cross-cutting across our work as technology, for instance, or finances today, right? No matter which sector you are in, no matter what kind of issue you're addressing, you have to reckon with technology, and you use technology. I think that's going to happen for climate as well. It's not going to be a specific issue area like, I don't know, like education or youth or gender. It's going to be cross-cutting across everything else. And so things like, how do you bring sustainability considerations into your workplace? The climate mainstreamer, let's say, that could be a job in the years to come. Similarly, I feel like me, you're probably also seeing, it almost feels like every week there's a new director of social impact role at some new big company. And I think those roles oftentimes go internally, so it's hard to get them from the outside. But it also shows that that's a new set of opportunities that are coming up. And so I would say director of social impact at any major company was not a role that existed 5 years ago, possibly, maybe 1 or 2, but like not typically. And then this is not CSR. This is the role of how social impact in the company's core business, right? So that's another role that I would say is going to keep increasing as well. So that's 2. And I think within each of these issues, you could go deeper and deeper. In climate, for instance, you can talk about building design, you can talk about appliances, you can talk about all kinds of things as well that are going to keep leading to more and more opportunities.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Roshan and Kata. For people watching, feel free to put in your questions or comments and let us know where you're watching from in the chat box within LinkedIn. So Roshan, I have a million questions, but obviously I'll just ask one. So just a very practical question, whether at your role at Ashoka, at Amani, or IREX now, where you've been for a few months, can you just talk a little bit about the hiring process when you either are directly hiring people or having influence over hiring? Like what makes candidates stand out? How many applications do you get? And probably the most important question, are you seeing change to job openings being remote first, distributed, where there's, because there's a saying that talent is universally distributed, opportunity isn't. So as someone who's worked in the global impact sector across the world, are you seeing IREX or other organizations say, we want the best talent, regardless if they're in our neighborhood?
Absolutely. I think that we're definitely seeing that a lot more. It was starting to happen before the pandemic, to be perfectly honest, but the pandemic has accelerated it dramatically. I think particularly organizations that are starting up now or have started within the last decade are going to be remote first, or are often the case remote first, unless of course the work is needed to be on the ground, right? If you're working in a particular community, let's say you're doing education or running a health clinic or something, yes, there's potentially a remote angle, but your mandate and your mission is in that particular community, so you're going to have to be local there as well. But of course, there are lots of intermediary roles, working with research firms, consulting firms, capacity building firms, that you can do your work or most of your work virtually. And I think that people who have grown up in digital natives are much more inclined to that, and that's happening more and more. Ashoka, for instance, my former organization, I know is largely remote first now. I don't know what the hiring practices are, but from what I'm hearing from my friends who are there, most of them are working from home. In fact, the Ashoka global headquarters is temporarily, I believe, at WeWork. So that tells you something from being in 3 floors in a big corporate office building. Amani Institute has always been remote first. We have offices in some parts of the world, but during COVID, we actually gave up our offices in India and Brazil. We still only have a physical office in Kenya, so the vast majority of our team are working globally. IREX is a different case because it is, a large international development firm, and thanks to a lot of regulatory reasons, because IREX works a lot with U.S. government projects, we need to have people closer to Washington, D.C., so it's harder to be remote first. But the conversation around going back to the office, where you work from, and so on, is still very much an active conversation within IREX. I think that this is going to be the case everywhere. So that's specifically looking at your question around remote first, Craig. Let me know if there are other parts of that question you want me to
just one quick thing. So what is your advice to job seekers? Obviously it depends if they're junior, mid-level, senior, but if you're getting 200 applications or 100 or 500, what makes an application stand out? And just maybe talk it through whether it's Mani or at IREX, like what happens? Does it go through an applicant tracking system and then later on a human sees it? Just a little bit logistics, and how do you get it narrowed down to, let's say, the top 5 to 10 people you might do a first interview with?
I'm not in the HR team at IREX, which is a large 600-person organization. So I don't know the ins and outs of that. I do know that just in general around the world, the use of application tracking softwares are increasing, and to put that more simply, that means there's a software reading your resume and cover letter and deciding whether you should proceed, which I just think is given the amount of time people take into developing those documents, it's a bit unfortunate. But that's the nature of the beast today. I think the whole recruiting system and process is completely broken, having just gone through it on the job seeker side myself, but also having been on the employer side too, and now being not the employer per se, but managing and leading a team where we have 15 open positions on our team right now. And I think across the sector, we're seeing lots and lots of open positions and people having trouble finding them. I think there's maybe mismatched expectations on both sides of this equation. But I would say that it's like hiring is both one of the hardest things I found as an employer, as an entrepreneur, was the hardest part of my job description was to hire and to hire well, because the opportunity cost is so high of making the wrong hire. So people tend to be quite wary about hiring. And so then you have longer and longer recruiting processes, which all from an applicant standpoint make for, a less than ideal experience to go through. But from the employer standpoint, the risks are so high that you end up trying to do maybe too many things. If it was up to me, I would do away completely with the cover letter. I think that's a completely pointless document. I think short answer questions work a lot better. They're less easy to templatize, and you also get a better sense of the person. But short answers, not like long essays. I think there's a number of ideas that I have to try to make that process better. But I haven't hit on, what an innovation would be in this space. But I think it's a space that's desperately crying out for innovation. I don't think the search firms are necessarily the only option. It's tough on both sides, is what I'll say. And I think as an applicant, if that's our target audience here, you're probably best off by networking as much as you can, trying to get in the door somewhere through building relationships, then relying on purely an application to get seen. More and more I rarely see someone who got completely through a job process purely from putting out a resume and cover letter through that. And most of the time they know somebody at the organization already.
Thanks so much. And just to put a plug in, IREX don't contact Roshan, but IREX is hiring for lots of positions in many parts of the world. So check out their openings.
We have 80 open. IREX is growing dramatically. We have over 80 open positions. So if you're seeing this, please go to IREX and look at our jobs and apply, because there's a lot of opportunities right now.
Thanks. Go ahead, Captain.
So I'm trying to be good and follow the script, but I won't. I have an amazing professional in Washington.
Not
DC.
Following the script is
exactly
necessary in social change, right?
Top advice.
Yeah.
So I've been obsessed about reading, and we try to produce original content here for our members in PCDN Global. So I'm basically doing my homework through you in public. But I've been hearing about all these terms about the Great Resignation, but obviously the majority of research that is produced, it's in private sectors, right? So you being in DC, being in this large organization, what do you have to say, or how do you see things in terms of was social impact also impacted, for the lack of a better word, with this great phenomena of the Great Resignation, or are we moving at a different pace? What's your assessment on that? And most recently, I just heard Craig is going to be really mad at this quiet quitting, these work trends that are happening all over the world. And in China, there's a different one. But I think they're just symptoms. And us that study the world of work have to be paying attention. And my obsession is, how does this impact our field of social impact, wherever you are trying to create social change? So I just want your take on those interesting, troubling, but thought-provoking signs of the world of work.
I think that we're also in the era of, clickbait journalism. And so today I was reading an article in the BBC around quiet firing as well. So we've moved from quiet quitting to quiet firing. And that's the BBC, right? So it's not like some tabloid. So, I think that one thing to note, that whether it's social impact or private sector, like human beings set up human institutions in the way they know how. So the challenges and issues, I think, around people in the workplace, of course, there are different flavors and different aspects in different types of companies or different types of sectors. But in everyone was caught off guard by the pandemic and the jump to remote work. And many companies and organizations haven't adapted well enough to that. And so I think a lot of the Great Resignation had to do with that mismatch between what people wanted from their workplace and what the workplace wanted to do or could do. And sometimes also, we tend to blame organizations too quickly, not knowing all of the constraints and troubles that they have, and also that they're also human beings doing their best to deliver a job, right? One of the biggest, I think, casualties, if you want to say, of the Great Resignation, I think, has been middle managers, right? Because they have been having to deal with the manage up and manage down and face competing pressures from both. And it's been probably never been harder to be a manager, mid senior manager today than in the past, because it's just a lot of different expectations on you. I don't think this is different, whether it's the social sector or the private sector. I think this has been happening across both. I also think it's too early to say, maybe there's a recession and the Great Resignation completely goes away because everyone's, who needs to keep their jobs, and then we'll say, oh yeah, that was a fad, it was a trend, it was a meme, and it didn't last very long. Or maybe there's no recession and we have 3 more years of people moving all over the place, and then we'll say, yes, that really changed the nature of work as we know it, right? Who knows? It's going to. I would say like we tend to want to have answers to these questions immediately, but I think time will still tell. I know that IREX, like most organizations or most colleagues that I'm speaking to, are still trying to negotiate return to the office principles and policies, and there are many advantages of not being in the office. There are also many advantages of being together in an office. And so I would be hesitant to say that it has to be one or the other. I also know that if it's hybrid, that's also got its own set of challenges and things. So it's got to be, every organization's got to do this for themselves. And I hesitate to say something that is going to be the truth for everyone at all times.
You just really identify my uneasiness with uncertainty and my need to know now quickly and find out. And it is indeed very messy. And in fact, we haven't even finished the whole full pandemic cycle, and who knows what's going to happen. So yeah, you're very mature and very thoughtful. But Craig, I need to follow up on what
Sure.
was my question, because one of the things I like to do when I did the podcast on my own is really have the opportunity to have real conversations and not just make it sound that we have these amazing professionals. We've been very lucky with all of our guests, amazing, and it sounds easy, and you just you're amazing, and goodbye, and everyone should be inspired because oh my gosh, the road is so curvy and so hard. So what I mean, you told us that hiring was one of the things that you struggle the most. I share that, as you made me think how hard it was being a manager way before the pandemic. I can't imagine now. What other places have been struggles for you in your career, and how do you develop, or have you developed some mechanisms for surviving and thriving?
As an entrepreneur, I think hiring was probably the biggest challenge. I think the second biggest was regulation in many parts of the world, particularly in that kind of those times in an organization where you're trying to make something work, and you may not have the resources to be able to to throw money at problems, right? Which oftentimes the private sector can do. And so you have to keep thinking about different ways of doing things, or different ways of working, and especially in difficult environments. And so I think that was like constantly an ongoing challenge. How do you get money to flow across different parts of the world? How do you register an organization, in a country where maybe they're not so friendly to nonprofits, but all of your charters and your mandate is nonprofits, but you still have to set up as a for-profit organization somewhere just because of local laws and all of that. That was probably another big piece of it. I think the constant need to innovate and the constant need to, especially as a young organization that's looking to take on established players, you've got to be constantly looking to see what are the trends, how are you innovating in response to them, what is going to be your answer to questions like Great Resignation, as well. And those, were always something that that was hard to do as well. You mentioned surviving and thriving, and I know you've probably read the book or taking it from my colleague Elina's work that you've also featured on the podcast. And I think that's something that's really important as well. And there's a set of, again, it's almost mindsets more than skills, or or it's practices that I think people would benefit a lot from putting into practice. So making sure you're focusing on your relationships, making sure you're retaining your optimism, making sure that that you're thinking about work-life balance in a way that's healthy, as opposed to a way that maybe imposes artificial boundaries on your own mind and your own self. So there's a range of different ways in which we can think about that, but we only get to do this like in practice ourselves. So the book that we wrote, we have put into practice everything that we are preaching in the book, and so we know they work, or we know they work for us, and here are, we talk about ways in which they can be adapted as well for others. So those are, I would say, some of the challenges.
And it's a bestseller, by the way, people, if you don't know that.
Yes, and please check it out. You can find it on their, the new rules of work that you can find on the website. You can find it on Amazon or elsewhere. So I have two more questions, then maybe Kata have one more, and we'll see if any others come in. One just very simple question. I mean, I worked at IREX 25 years ago, and it's obviously expanded a lot, but you offer so many interesting fellowships and training and leadership programs. So just for people who don't know IREX, can you just share a little bit, like what type of opportunities are you offering? There's the jobs, but upskilling, training, the YALI program, the Mandela Fellowship, just like why people might want to take a look at the work IREX is doing.
Yeah, and I assume that this, I know knowing PCDN, you have an international audience. So I'll say that the majority of my programs within the leadership practice at IREX are for internationals. And by that, we mean non-US citizens, since I'm in the US. So we've got our Mandela Washington program, which, brings African leaders from around the world to the US for leadership development and placement experiences. Similarly, there's a program for Latin America and the Caribbean leaders called the Young Leaders of the Americas, where we're bringing this is for one, focuses on entrepreneurs, where we bring young entrepreneurs from Latin America and the Caribbean and Canada again to the US for to learn from entrepreneurs here, to build business development partnerships, to build networks that they can use to scale their companies and nonprofits when they go back home. We have two programs focused on civil society leaders, one more looking at young leaders in their early 20s, and one more leaders towards their late 20s, that again bring leaders from over 100 countries, civil society leaders from over 100 countries to the US for leadership development experiences. We also run a couple of student exchange programs. This is very country specific. So there's one in Pakistan and there's one in Tunisia as well, that bring, again, students to the US to have formative experiences in American universities and, hopefully take some of those lessons back with them. So that's just a snippet of the kinds of programs that we run in the leadership practice here at IREX. And we're growing, and so hopefully we'll have a lot more the next time we talk.
So two quick follow-up questions. So one is, obviously you're a very busy person, but what are you either doing for enjoyment or upskilling for yourself? Like Kat and I, we've gotten really into watching startup shows, like, all the different ones about the startup industry, both the good and the bad, like We Crashed or, all those, are the one about Theranos. But like, in terms of upskilling, are you working on stuff or just chilling? How are you spending your time?
Thanks. I also watched those shows. I think there were 4 about these kinds of founders, and I watched them all because I'm also, like you, a bit of a nerd about startups and entrepreneur, and particularly how much that shapes our culture. And I actually remember I did a LinkedIn post on like what my lessons were from all of those shows. But I think, right now my 2 areas of interest are, one is around climate change, as I've shared already, and I'm trying, upskilling myself in this. I came into it, let's say, about a year ago, not knowing very much about the field at all, but went through a process of, I would say, 3 things. I read a number of books, 4 things. I read a number of books. I listened to a lot of climate change podcasts while I'm working out, and I did a couple of courses with online certificate courses, one around sustainable tourism and one around the energy transition. And then 4th, and perhaps maybe most importantly of all of them, I did a quite a bit of consulting in this space. So working with climate change related organizations to help them solve problems for themselves. But through that, I learned a lot about the field myself. And that was infinitely more valuable than anything else I did. So that's one area. And then the other one, and this is a shared passion I know with Craig, is I'm getting more interested in investment and finance, maybe as I get older myself and having spent 20 years running around the world working for nonprofits, now starting to think about my own long-term sustainability as well. And so, trying to understand better how investment works and where you can, get the most value for the limited funds that you may have as well.
Okay, thanks so much. So a question from Maya, I think you might know, based in Spain. What were the challenges transitioning from being an entrepreneur back to being an employee, both from your own experience and a hiring manager's perspective? Because you went from, you did stuff in India, then you did Ashoka, then you were on your own, in partnership, building Amani, consulting, and now you're back at a medium-sized development organization.
That's not me.
Okay. I think that was Craig.
Okay. Yeah, my mic fell off. I'm sorry.
Ooh.
No worries. Hi, Maya. Nice to hear from you. I think I would have probably, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, better answers for you in a year's time, because I've just made this transition. I haven't yet seen all the challenges. I've seen a lot of the upsides right now, in that I don't have final P&L responsibility for the organization. I have my own kind of zone of work to focus on, but I don't have to keep an eye on everything that the organization is doing. And I'm not the hiring manager right now. I am trying to help our hiring managers by getting the word out, building IREX's brand, and supporting processes. But that's not, oftentimes not my call at the end of the day, and that's refreshing too for now. So ask me again in a year, and maybe I'll have different answers. But right now, I know there'll be challenges. Don't get me wrong, but I've yet to fully experience them.
Well, Roshan is living his best life. It's when I got tired of being a consultant, and I was actively looking for a job in an organization, because there were things I wanted to change. And then, as you very wise, you said, give it time, and things changed. But I'm glad that because like Maya, I was curious about that question, like to being your own boss, to insert yourself in a big, long-standing organization. And I love how your account, or where you are right now, is very refreshing and very it's nice. I welcome it. So Craig, can I end? Okay, so we have Nikhil Shirali. How do you practice in your everyday life the lessons you learn on sustainability?
Thanks, Nikhil. Yes, it's a really good question. And I'm going to share with you, my answer to that. But I also think that there's a caveat to that. So my answer to that is, I'm doing my best. We don't have a car. If we do, we live right downtown in the city, so we don't need one, maybe, but we just don't want one. And if we did, we'd buy an electric vehicle for sure. But I don't have a car. We try to buy our products from sustainable organizations as much as possible. We use ThreadUp, which is a sustainable clothing recycling company run by a classmate of mine, or founded by a classmate of mine, that we use a lot. We try to, reduce our consumption of dairy and meat, trying to use more vegan alternatives for both of those. We're trying to be conscious about our electricity footprint and use of resources as much as we can. I think, trying to make those choices on a day-by-day basis of making, when you have a choice between the sustainable option and the less sustainable option, to be able to vote with your wallet or vote with your feet to go to the one that matters. So that's how I try to lead my life. I do think, though, that there's all of the research on this issue says that individual choices are only going to add up to so much. Like we need to be talking about it to as many people as possible, partly so that people, more and more people start to make these choices, but even more that we create more of a political environment where these choices can become policy at a larger level, at both for big companies as well as for the government. In many cases, the private sector is trying to lead on this, and they're saying we need government regulation because otherwise we would be being unethical to make the sustainable choices, because that's not what we're being, measured against. And of course, there are companies that are, financing the destruction of the climate, and that's another story. But I think, question like the whole thing about like individual choices, or particularly shaming people around, flight shame, for instance, in Europe is a big thing. Or like these aren't actually helpful in the end, because they actually make people more defensive, make people more likely to say there's no hope, I give up, I don't want to lead a miserable life because of, climate considerations 20 years from now. So we've got to actually, while trying to make better choices, make sure that we're having the conversation around larger scale policy change as well, and incentives and investing in like sustainable options going forward, so that the conversations about positive solutions as opposed to, I think, negative, scolding of individuals, which definitely will not help the situation at all.
Craig, because we're out of time, can I close with the pizza question? Okay, this is just yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful to hear that you're living right now your best life. Congratulations for the book that we continue to promote, and for putting it together with Lina, because it's just such, all those years, all those 12 years of knowledge that you gain are there for everyone to access. So thank you for, we know it's easy to have the idea of a book, but it's harder to really finish it. The fireside question to end, and thanking you very much again for this time, is: are you a pineapple on the pizza person or not pineapple on the? And this will be contingent on us being friends in the future.
Oh, interesting. Now I feel like I need to be more measured in my response to this, because I don't know which side of this fence you lie on, and I want to stay friends with you, Kata. But I think pineapple on pizza is horrific.
I think the same. So I think
I have yet to find a guest that likes pineapple on pizza. I want to be the dissent voice that says I unapologetically eat pineapple on the pizza, and I want other, closeted pizza eaters that love pineapple to come out. So no, we're still gonna be friends. Craig doesn't like pineapple on the pizza.
neither does Jacob.
One of the best pizzas I ever had takes me back to my days of living in Nairobi, Kenya, and there was a pizza place that did mango and peanut sauce together on pizza, which was actually excellent. So maybe there's some hope for yellow fruits on pizza after all.
And Roshan, my last question: if people want to engage, obviously follow you on LinkedIn, but like, what's your preferred channel for people to stay up to date on what you're working on?
LinkedIn, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much for sharing your time. And if people want to send in your pizza feedback, we could see that Pizza for Impact. And have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for everything you do. And again, if you're looking for fellowships or interesting career opportunities, check out IREX. Check out Roshan Ileana's book. It's wonderful. So if you're thinking about advancing your career of impact or just advising others, and then stay tuned. Our next podcast will be first week in November with Lucille Galvin, who's the Director of Career Services at the Asian Institute of Management. So she's wonderful and has worked both in the private sector and academia. So that'll be on our website soon. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much for having me, both of you. It's been a pleasure as always.